Hi, everybody. What's going on? Why is this still going? All right. Hi, I'm Skip Elsheimer. Welcome to the AV Geeks Lunchtime Streaming Show. We just watched some old 16mm home movies, and it didn't look like I adjusted the speed correctly, so everybody was going very fast. People did not go really fast back in the day. The situation was that early home movies that were shot on 16 were often recorded at 16 or 18 frames a second, and then we would scan them or play them back at 24 frames a second, and that is sound speed. The earlier version was considered silent speed. So when we scan them, we just scan them at 24. Then in post, I would slow them down, but it looks like I missed that one. So there you go. Yeah, we watch old 16mm films here and comment on them. And this next film is part of the Retrospect series, which was the Department of Civil Defense was trying to come up with some educational programming that would show on television, but also trying to make sure that TV stations would actually show it. So what they did is they slotted out, instead of these little short PSAs, they created a show. And so what they would do is use stock footage and kind of talk about things, and then they would have like a commercial, which was basically the PSA regarding civil defense, and then they would go back and do more stock footage about something else. So here is Retrospect, Stocking Your Shelter. Enjoy.
Bringing you Retrospect, a film excursion into past events which form the patterns by which we live today.
Retrospect is brought to you by the Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization in cooperation with your local Civil Defense Office and your local station. And now here's your host, Douglas Edwards.
Contrary to the way we remember it, the joyride of the prosperity during the 20s was not shared by everyone. The forgotten man during those years was the farmer. But even though he went through a grave crisis in the 20s, experience and tradition had taught him that the remedy for hard times was harder work. While the rest of the country plunged into despair during the Depression, the farmer went right on working. He hadn't been getting rich anyway. And then, in 1933, tragedy came full cycle. The farmer was suddenly faced with his oldest and dreaded enemy, drought. Throughout the Great Plains, from Montana to Oklahoma and Texas, from Arkansas to Colorado, the high winds came to blow away weakened crops and topsoil. The sweet prairie air became thick with destructive clouds of dust. Standing crops were buried under the drifting soil, and not a farm building, home, or piece of equipment proved tight enough to keep out the invading dust. The storms continued for days, sometimes weeks at a time. Turning night into day and day into night, they made every highway and black road a constant hazard. The farms would not be alone to suffer. Dust made a howling wilderness out of a prairie town, all of them all over the Midwest. Against the forces of nature, man, as always, could only look on in helpless frustration. The farmer prayed for daylight. When daylight came, he would find only sterility. Perhaps there would be time to salvage something, to infuse new life into that which he feared deep in his heart was lifeless. Perhaps the dust would not return. Perhaps he dreamed it all. The dust returned again and again throughout the drought years to consume the fruits of man's labor, to squander his daily bread, to shatter what little hope he harbored for the future. Then the dust storms ended. When there was nothing left to take, there was left only the grim evidence of the havoc that they had wrought. Those who had drawn their nourishment from the land could only wonder why a lifetime of toil and hardship should end in famine. Throughout the Dust Bowl, mass evacuation. The farmer prepared to leave the land forever. His place of shelter, his daily tools, now impotent and worthless. From the prairie states there began a great exodus. The highways saw a steady stream of Tin Lizzies, each loaded down with all the worldly possessions of the nomads they carried. Their destination, California. Not everyone made it. Along the way, they constructed shanty towns where they could rest from the exhausting journey, where they could talk of the future with hope in their hearts, where few, if any, ever spoke of the past. The first to arrive were not disappointed. In the sun-drenched farms of California, there were opportunities for those who wanted to work, and the weary travelers wanted nothing more. But for all the opportunities, California could handle only so many transients. The Okies, as they were called, represented a potentially serious unemployment problem. In addition, there arose a question of public health. But in spite of the drastic measures taken by the state to check the influx, the homeless thousands kept coming, only to find awaiting them the long arm of authority and the disenchanting knowledge that there just weren't enough brass rings to go around. There were those who stayed behind, making the best of what they had and overcoming a tragedy for which they had not been prepared. It's important to remember that preparedness is a vital part of our lives. Every home is a vital link in our national defense. The director of the Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization has stated that if America is attacked with nuclear weapons, survival at the beginning would be a personal and individual responsibility. There would be a brief lapse of time before local government could function efficiently. This is the reason the National Plan for Civil Defense and Defense Mobilization, established 2 years ago by President Eisenhower, states every individual must be prepared to survive without outside assistance for at least 2 weeks following enemy attack. What kind of supplies would be needed? How much food and water? Mrs. Norton Pearl, Director of Women's Activities of the Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization, is here today to give us an idea of what we need for shelter living. Welcome to the program, Mrs. Pearl.
Nice to be here.
Does this shelter look pretty well stocked to you?
Indeed it does. And any family with a shelter like this would feel much easier knowing that they're prepared for emergency. Notice how well utilized the space is. This is a very large factor to consider when you store necessary items for a 2-week stay.
Well, food seems to be taking up most of the space, Mrs. Pearl. Is there a special list of recommended foods, or is the decision left up to the individual homemaker?
Well, it's a combination of both. No government agency can attempt to choose foods for an individual family, but we have drawn up a list of easily stored and easily prepared foods with plenty of vitamins. We suggest that a family rearrange this basic list to suit its own individual tastes. You see, this shelter has been stocked with, with soups, with vegetables, juices, fruits, evaporated milk, beef stew, tuna. It's a well-rounded out food supply.
Will the foods have to be changed often?
Well, not too often. We recommend that they be used regularly and replaced. Now, the water, of course, should be changed every 6 weeks. And don't forget that there are many good, healthful processed foods on the market today that are easily stored and will keep for quite a long time.
Well, I know they have quite a bit of water stored in the shelter. Is that much water necessary?
Yes, it is. We recommend 7 gallons per person for the 2-week stay. But, of course, you can include all liquids in that 7 gallons. And don't forget that your hot water heater is a very good source for water.
That's in a basement shelter.
Yes. Be sure to include enough cooking and eating utensils. A chafing dish is an excellent idea if the electric power has been cut off. And, of course, there are many other items, too.
Well, one I can think of. How about a can opener?
Maybe 2, just in case. But another item that's very important is a battery radio. Only on Conrad wavelengths, either 640 or 1240, will we receive information and instruction. And this news can be a vital morale booster when you have to live in a shelter for 2 weeks.
Right.
Also, you'll see that there are games stored here and books, games for adults and children alike, and this will break the monotony should it arise. And you should plan exercises, too.
What other supplies do you recommend storing in the shelter?
Well,
Mrs.
we
Pearl?
recommend a household toolkit, and a first aid kit is a must. Don't forget either to put special medicines in for your invalids in your family if you have them. 1 or 2 flashlights with batteries, extra batteries for the flashlight and the radio, paper towels, grocery bags, large cans for waste.
Well, this shelter certainly seems ready for just about any emergency that we might think of, and we hope never happens, but might. Thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Norton Pearl, for being with us today on Retrospect. As a matter of fact, we should all take our cue from today's shelter and from Mrs. Pearl and start taking the necessary steps to protect our own homes and our own children. Japan became the dominant power in the Far East after her defeat of Russia in 1905. By 1920, the land of the rising sun was recognized as one of the Big Five world powers, one of the respected and influential members of the League of Nations. The Western world tended to picture Japan as a remote land of apple blossoms, butterflies, and rice paper. Few Westerners had been afforded a first-hand look at the real Japan, a nation with a passion for discipline, authority, and regimentation. The land of the rising sun, in the 60 years since her doors were reopened to foreigners, had seen the other great powers of the world expand their empires beyond the seas. While becoming a signatory to every major peace treaty of the 20s, Japan harbored the secret dream of a new order in Asia. Behind the Emperor Hirohito, a powerful military clique preached ultra-nationalism as Japan organized the most efficient and destructive war machine in the history of the Far East. In 1931, the worldwide depression hit hard at Japan. Heaviest of the economic blows was loss of the American silk market. The time had come, said the militarists, for direct action in China. The warlords planned a simulated explosion on the Japanese-controlled Manchurian Railway. They blamed the incident on Chinese bandits and sent a so-called punitive expedition into Manchuria to deal with the guilty parties. The warlords' idea of a punitive expedition turned out to be a fully equipped army. Drugged by the propaganda of his superiors, the Japanese soldier fought with fanatic devotion, believing patriotism and sacrifice for the state to be supreme attributes, believing Japan was destined to bring peace and order to all of Asia. By invading Manchuria, Japan violated 2 treaties she had signed with the United States, the Kellogg-Briand Pact and the Nine-Power Treaty of 1922. But Japanese military leaders used a convenient dual diplomacy. We act, Tokyo explains, they said. Thus did the land of the rising sun launch the first phase of its plan for domination of the Orient. The long military buildup had been worth all the effort. After striking with swift suddenness, nothing could stop the forward march of conquest. The poorly equipped forces of Manchuria and China had proved no match for a modern war machine. By the end of 1931, the Emperor's armies controlled all of Manchuria. In response to a protest by China, the League of Nations appointed the Lytton Commission to conduct an investigation of the Japanese aggression. The Commission's report was unfavorable to Japan, but the League proved incapable of adding bite to its bark. Japan served notice and left the League in 1933. In that same year, Japanese army units moved into the Mongolian province of Reiho. By 1937, full-scale war had broken out in China. In the first 3 months of this undeclared war, more than 100,000 Chinese and Japanese were killed. After the fall of Beiping came a series of devastating and senseless air raids on the city of Canton, then the rape of Nanking, and soon the blood spilled in China surpassed that of the Civil War in Spain. In the wake of Japanese destruction, China became a land of homeless people. Throughout the decade of aggression, Tokyo ignored a steady stream of protests from Great Britain, the United States, and France. By 1939, Japanese forces controlled over 90% of China's railway system and every large city. She was then ready to prepare for the fateful years ahead. Well, now, an important reminder from Civil Defense. When stocking your shelter, choose foods that are easily stored and rich in vitamins. Stock canned goods in small or average size cans to prevent waste. Stock enough water to last your family for 14 days. Remember to rotate the food at least once a year and change the water every 6 weeks. The safety of your family could depend on the plans and preparations you make now. For further information on protecting your home, contact your local Civil Defense Office or write to OCDM, Battle Creek, Michigan. That's it for now. I hope you'll be looking in next time when we bring you more great films of history as it was made. Until then, this is Douglas Edwards saying goodbye for now.
Retrospect, starring Douglas Edwards, was brought to you by the Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization in cooperation with your local Civil Defense Office and your local station. Survival in the nuclear age is a personal responsibility, touching every American family. Make sure you take part. Learn the facts about civil defense preparedness. Start your home preparedness program today. The prepared family builds a prepared nation. Civil defense is an American tradition.
So it's unclear how often these shows were shown. I mean, like a lot of public service announcement types of things, usually TV stations would show it early in the broadcast day or very late in the broadcast day when they just didn't have enough programming. But Doug Edwards, yeah, CBS. Thankfully, he showed up in some You Are There episodes. So it was great to kind of see him on this, but also see him as a CBS correspondent. Let's see. So behind me, we have a film scanner set up. And thank you, Jeff, for the coffee. There was no talk about what to do with coffee in the shelter, but I think it's very important. Also, the other thing that was not talked about was cheese. There wasn't any talk about cheese. So I feel like this next film is going to talk about cheese. Enjoy.
Of all the capital cities of the Western world, Paris is surely one of the most civilized and elegant. The bridges over the Seine, the spacious squares and boulevards, the ancient historic buildings and the smart shopping streets all make their contribution to her unique charm. Less well known is another aspect of Paris, the narrow, crowded street markets where Parisians flock to choose from some of the best food and drink that Europe has to offer. These fascinating, lively little streets are found tucked away in odd corners all over the city. The French often cling to their traditions, but when they wish, they can adapt with surprising swiftness to new ideas. On the outskirts of Paris is this giant supermarket. Inside its vast halls is the sort of cheese counter that can be found only in France. For the French produced several hundred completely different kinds of cheeses, even if you don't count local variations, which may be made by individual farmers.
Je cherche le fromage qui pourrait être fait pour demain soir. Oui, quelque chose comme ça.
The French give as much attention to selecting cheese as they devote to choosing
En
wine.
fait, ils sont très bien faits, ces fromages.
No Frenchwoman, for instance, would buy a cheese without discussing her purchase with the shopkeeper. A Brie or Camembert will be tested with a gentle pressure to make sure it's springy and creamy.
Exactement, on va ouvrir et se garder.
France has a multitude of small towns. Many of them, like Auxerre, peaceful and beautiful, are a delight to the visitor who wanders away from the main highways. Once a week, maybe more often, these towns will hold a market. It will be well patronized, for here there is a chance to buy local produce fresh from the country. Among all the knickknacks, clothes, fruit, and vegetables offered for sale, there will be several stalls selling cheese and offering a bewildering choice. Each of these cheeses is quite distinctive, both in taste and texture. Take one of the greatest, Roquefort, or Roquefort. It's a blue cheese with a quite strong flavor, and it's made in a very special way. To begin with, Roquefort is produced not from cow's milk, but from the milk of sheep. Most of the flocks live on the barren limestone hills of southwest France. Their milk will be taken to one of the small cheese factories in the countryside, and it is tested for quality before being emptied into a series of giant vats. Then, the great secret of the manufacture of this cheese, the Roquefort penicillium, is added to the milk. It's made from a microscopic blue mushroom found only in the caves of Roquefort and nowhere else in the world. Rennet, which causes milk to curdle, is added. In a few hours, the whole vat has set into solid curds mixed with liquid whey. Only the curds are needed for cheese making, so they are broken into segments like this to assist in draining off the whey. When the curds are sufficiently dry, the cheese molds are filled. After they have spent a few days in cold storage, each one will be thoroughly coated in a layer of salt. Now they are ready to leave the dairy for the town of Roquefort itself, where the final processing takes place. Mount Combalou dominates the town of Roquefort. It looks solid enough, but it is in fact honeycombed with a vast system of caves. The blue cheese of Roquefort has been made here for hundreds of years. The Romans knew it well and wrote about it. All cheeses that bear the name of Roquefort must by law be matured in the caves of Combalou, for the temperature and the humidity are exactly right to bring the cheese to perfection. These needles allow the atmosphere of the caves to penetrate and work on the cheeses. They are stacked on their sides and left to mature in these giant caverns. After some weeks, the cheeses are wrapped in a metal foil to assist the final stages of the maturing process. They are examined at intervals to make sure they're developing properly. Finally, the foil is removed and they are repacked, ready for market. Roquefort was the favorite cheese of the Emperor Charlemagne, who reigned in the year 800 AD. And now, over 1,100 years later, it is still made here by the same methods, and it's still just as good. Every region of France has its own character. In the mountains in the east of France, the scenery is indeed different. The cities, too, this is Annecy, have subtle differences that distinguish them from the towns of the Mediterranean or central France. In the cheese shop, a selection of regional cheeses made from the milk of cows grazing in the mountain slopes. Some of them come in very large wheel shapes. These are hard cheeses, the easiest of all to store. One of the best known is the Swiss Emmental, with its characteristic holes. In making Emmental and other similar cheeses, the giant molds are filled with curds, and then they are cooked in large ovens. Afterwards, the cheeses are put into presses and subjected to considerable pressure. As soon as the mold is stripped away, the new cheese is given a dusting of salt. Because of the weight of these wheels of Emmental, elaborate machinery is needed to move them to storage, and in the process of maturing, they have to be turned over occasionally. Once again, natural caves are sometimes used for storage. The air is usually cool and damp, ideal for keeping cheeses. Like the other hard cheeses, Emmental keeps well, and it's possible to maintain a large quantity. During the maturing process, a fermentation takes place within the Emmental, and this results in its typical holes. The progress of this fermentation is checked regularly by the staff. As these holes develop, the cheese expands. The drum on the rack below is fresh. The one on top is fully matured. Each wheel of Emmental is very heavy and costs a great deal, so there aren't too many customers for whole cheeses. In this factory, they're cut into more convenient and saleable sizes. This is how a good Emmental should look. The packaging operation is carried out with a minimum of human handling. A machine weighs and prices each portion, prints the correct label, and puts it on the package. The factory prepares convenience packs of grated and shredded cheese. Emmental is frequently blended with other cheeses to make a whole range of processed cheeses. They come in many varieties. Occasionally they're flavored with liqueur, or sometimes coated with nuts or grape seeds. Travel west across France, and you will eventually reach the Auvergne, one of the most beautiful and fascinating regions of this lovely country. There's a great deal of dairy farming in the Auvergne, and milk from cows pastured here goes into two of the most popular French cheeses, Saint-Nectaire and Cantal. They are semi-hard cheeses. Saint-Paulin is another of the same type. It's produced in several shapes and sold under different brands. All are made in the same way. After the curds of milk are poured into the molds, they are not cooked, but they are put under pressure. It is this which gives them their particular texture. They are salted by being immersed in a brine bath. This particular variety doesn't develop a crust, so the cheeses are dipped in wax several times to give them a protective coating. After a final wash, they go on their way to the packing department. In the valley of the Loire, near the exquisite Château of Valençay, another cheese is produced. This one is made from the goat's milk. Goats are notoriously quirky individual animals. Perhaps their attitude has rubbed off on the cheesemakers, for the firms that make goat's cheese are notorious for their independence and individuality. Some of them are quite small family concerns. Even the larger factories do not use much automation, preferring to rely on human skills and a long tradition of craftsmanship. Goat cheeses come in a great variety of shapes. After the usual processes of molding and salting, these cheeses are dusted with powdered charcoal. During the maturing period, the charcoal combines with the curds to form the typical blue-gray rind. The goat cheeses of the Loire Valley have a delicious and delicate taste. Although much appreciated by connoisseurs, they are not very well known outside France. On the other hand, the familiar rondelles of Brie and Camembert are found everywhere. To satisfy the worldwide demand for these two cheeses, they have to be made on a very large scale. The molds for Brie are filled with curds in an atmosphere approaching 100% humidity, for cheese making is best done in very damp conditions. Brie is made in the region of the same name, which lies a little to the east of Paris. After a time, the molds are stripped from the rondelle of Brie. They are then salted by being dipped in a brine bath. A special penicillium has been added to this bath, and it is this penicillium which causes the typical velvety rind to develop during the process of maturing, which the French call the affinage. During the affinage, the cheeses are constantly turned to make sure they mature evenly. Reddish spots on the surface of the matured Brie are one sign of an excellent cheese. Camembert is also produced on a large scale and molded by the thousands in giant factories. But historic places like the Abbey of Aulnay in Normandy produce Camembert fermier, or farmhouse Camembert. This cheese is made in the traditional way with milk fresh from local farms. All the operations are done by hand using methods quite unchanged over the years. After molding, the cheeses are salted. The penicillium that gives camembert its typical flavor and appearance is mixed in with this salt. Now the cheeses will be stored. Like brie, they are turned at intervals to make sure they develop evenly. During this period, the penicillium causes the velvety rind to form as the cheeses mature. Then they are ready for packing and marketing. Not far from the Abbey of Aunay at Villers-Bocage, the cattle market begins in the early hours of the morning. Comment ça va? The informal French greeting between friends. Some come to appraise, some to haggle and buy. In spite of the jokes, this is a serious business. Normandy is one of the richest and most important farming regions of France. The cows auctioned at this market are a special breed. Normandy cattle, great heavy beasts with a milk yield of exceptional size and quality. There are 2.5 million cows in Normandy, 13% of all the cattle in France. So, as you might expect, this beautiful countryside with its old, half-timbered buildings produces not only the bulk of the famous cheeses, but quite a few that are less well known. One of them takes its name from this small Normandy town, Pont-l'Évêque. It is still possible to find farms nearby where the farmer's wife turns out her own Pont-l'Évêque cheese in her farm dairy. This cheese and many others can be sampled at one of the little restaurants tucked away in the Normandy villages. In Paris, they can be found in one of the specialty cheese shops whose proprietors comb the length and breadth of France to offer the very best and the widest possible selections. A shop like this does not just offer cheeses for sale. It sells them only when they are fully matured and at peak condition. To do this, there has to be a cellar below where cheeses are brought to perfection at the correct temperature and humidity. The flat discs of brie, the giant emmental, pyramids of goat cheese. How does one choose? Well, a cheese board should contain some of each kind. One of the soft cheeses, a blue, perhaps one of the semi-hard cheeses. Some prefer one, some another, for the flavors of cheese vary enormously. It's one of the world's most appetizing and varied foods. As for which one you prefer, well, it's really just a matter of taste.
That was a lot of cheese footage. Mid-80s cheese footage in France. But still part of the kind of manufacturing process. Man, I love me some manufacturing process films. I just stumbled across a YouTube channel that's Japanese assembly line footage. Oh boy, big fan. And it also has like all the sounds. So there's a little bit of music in the background, but it's mostly just a chung, 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 chung. Love it. Absolutely love it. All right, what do we got coming up? This is missing the title, but it is Dead Out. Dead Out. Enjoy.
Time, and they'll double their land. That's Betty Lou. Ridge's eldest, smart as a whip. A man's got a right to be proud of a girl like Betty Lou. Well, that was the McDowell family one evening not long ago. But there's one thing that has no regard for all the time and effort a man may put into his home and his land. But fire did more than destroy McDowell's property. It hurt his loved ones. In town, the McDowell fire caused quite a shock. Folks couldn't figure it out how something like that could happen to a careful man like Ridge McDowell. What started that fire? A few days later, I decided to find out for myself. The McDowells had moved in with Ridge's cousin, Luke Simmons. I was lucky to find Ridge alone. But the minute I went in, I was sorry I'd come. He offered me a chair. Then I asked him how his little girl was, Betty Lou.
Well, she's all right, I guess. But her hands. You know, I've been burning brush for years, and I never had no trouble.
Got any idea what happened, Ridge?
Funny. One day you got a home, you got fields, timber, a future. The next? Well, the next...
I got out of there as fast as I could. That wasn't the time to get Ridge to talk. Brush fires. I've seen a good many of them get out of hand, all through these woods of ours. Folks seldom knew how they started. But when you look back, fit the pieces together, more often than not, you could put your finger on it. I recollect a couple of years ago, well, you wouldn't think that this tract, 250 acres timber, could be traced back to such a simple thing. A washpot fire. But that's what happened. All because time and trouble wasn't taken to rake around the coals of that washpot fire before leaving. Just a little old washpot fire. Take Manning Lowry. He figured by burning a strip of grass around his cotton field, he'd rid himself of boll weevil. He didn't bother to build a fire line. Well, Lowry did get rid of his grass. And he got rid of his woods. His neighbors, too. The only thing he didn't get rid of was the boll weevil, still snug and safe in the cotton patch. Wilson Bailey had the reputation of being the most putting it off man in the county, and not without reason. Bailey wanted to clear off a piece of new ground, but all through winter he kept putting it off. December, January, February, March. It was then Wilson Bailey decided to burn. His fire burned good, and with no fire line, it burned even better. Where Wilson Bailey failed to provide a fire line, nature did. The river. Wildfires. You can trace them back to a number of causes, but most frequent's the weather. I recollect Tom Mason. He practiced all the rules about caution against fire. He had a right big farm, kind of a show place in his county. Took a lot of pride in keeping it up. His land butted onto that of Charlie Stone. Been good neighbors for 20 years. Mason had a patch of run-down land he aimed to plant pines with the valuable help of his little boy. But one day, Charlie Stone decided to burn a ditch bank. Figured the weather was right. But the wind doesn't sound an alarm before it switches around. And fire has no regard for man's boundary lines. Too bad. But on that day, Tom Mason was in town. Left his wife and boy alone on the farm.
Got away from me.
Yep. Tom Mason practiced all the rules about caution against fires. Wherever there's a fire, there's always a cause. And the McDowell fire was no exception. I'd heard McDowell had gone back to his land, spring planted. That bug was still buzzing around in my mind, wouldn't let go. What started that fire? Hard work was doing Ridge good. He looked more like his old self, talkative too. In time, I steered him around to the day of the fire.
You know, I still think about that. Keeps going over in my mind, every step I took that day.
Suppose you tell me about it, Ridge.
Well, there's not much to tell. A couple of days before, I was fixing to burn in a field of sedge grass. I recollect it was a quiet day. No wind to speak of. I had Sam Lewis plow a good wide fire line around that field. It's a pretty big field, you know, so I had Sam plow an extra line down the middle. Then burned it off against the wind. That night I recollected rain, so the next day I figured was a good time to burn my brush. In the morning I plowed my fire line. In the afternoon, Jim Gibson, he come over to give me a hand. We burned them off without no trouble at all. Finished up just for supper time. Lucky we did, because a wind came up. I recollect feeling mighty good that we were through with the burning. It was then that Betty Lou came down from the house to meet me, like she always does when I come in from the field.
Well, that was McDowell's story. But I knew then what had happened. In burning brush safely, picking the right weather's about the most important thing. Burn early in the wet season, long before spring plowing time. Plow a good wide fire line around the field. 3 or more furrows. The wider, the better. Then build small piles. They're safer because they don't get as hot as the big ones. Time to burn is after a good rain, when the ground is damp and the wind quiet. Before you burn, let the ranger or fire warden know and tell your neighbors. Then get them to give you a hand. They'll have the tools just in case. An axe, fork and rake, swatter, shovel. And of course, water. Burn when the sun begins to go down and the cool, damp evening comes on. Less chance for a fire to get away. Burning against the wind means a slower fire. Staying with the pile before lighting the next is insurance that a fire won't get out of hand. Feed a fire gradually. It'll be easier to control. And double insurance against wildfire is a good, wide fire line. Last comes mopping up, policing up the area, and making sure your fire's out. And that's where Ridge McDowell made his mistake. Every step right but the last. Not taking time to make a thorough check before he left. That evening, a gale had come up, sent sparks into the grass, jumped his fire line into the woods, then to his house. What he should have done was finished the job. A man can never be too sure. For a fire that's not dead out means danger to his loved ones and his property. In In the last 20 years, thousands of acres of timber have made possible a new and vigorous industry for the South. Pulpwood for all kinds of products the whole country needs. Lumber for building up our homes and our industry. That'll mean a prosperous and growing South for all of us to enjoy. But there are hundreds of well-meaning folks like Wilson Bailey, like Manning Lowry, Charlie Stone, and many a home like Ridge McDowell's. Last year, over 5,500 forest fires in the South were caused by brush fires alone, a loss of over $25 million. Money out of all of our pockets. Loss of thousands of jobs for our men folks. Not to mention the loss of young growth. Seedlings that someday might have contributed to the strength of the South. These are our woods. Woods for our children and their children to work in, to live in, enjoy. Timber that is tied up with the economic growth of the South. Timber that tells us that we're moving onward, building toward a stronger and better future. Yet, a timber cruiser gets around. I've worked these woods of ours, I guess, a good many years. And you know, they're kind of nice. Let's keep them that way, huh?
So that film, at the end, was he the forest? Was he a ghost? I'm not 100% sure. Maybe he died in a fire. I don't know. So many possible options there. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We went all over the place, didn't we? But that's why I like doing this, is pulling films that we haven't seen and showing them to you. Some of them connect, some of them don't. That's fine. Join us tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, or Eastern Daylight Time, actually, and we'll watch some more films. If you like what you saw, hit the thumbs up. You can also donate via the Super Chat. You can also go to ko-fi.com/avgeeks, which is what Jeff did. So thank you for that. Or go to patreon.com/avgeeks to also contribute, so we can buy Sharpies. That's what we do, is we buy Sharpies. Sharpies and hard drives. That's all we do over here at AV Geeks. Everybody take care. Have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you soon. Bye.